Tonight, you wake before dawn in a frozen medieval village where the bread is running out, the fields are dying beneath frost, and even the monastery bells sound tired. You trudge through mud, hunger, and bitter winter winds as famine slowly tightens its grip on every cottage in the valley. Medieval life was already hard, but during famine, survival itself became a full-time job. So, before we step into the cold and misery together, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these immersive medieval journeys, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let's survive the brutal life of a medieval farmer during famine. Hey guys! Tonight you find yourself standing ankle-deep in cold mud beside a frozen medieval field, while dawn struggles weakly behind a curtain of grey clouds. The wind smells of wet straw, chimney smoke, and river mist drifting low across the earth. Somewhere beyond the dark hedgerows, monastery bells ring softly through the morning frost, slow and hollow, as if even the bells are too tired to greet the day properly. Your boots leak almost immediately, which feels unfair considering how proudly the cobbler described them last autumn. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. A horse snorts nearby, steam rising from its nose into the bitter air, while a cartwheel sinks crookedly into the roadside muck. Above you, crows balance along bare branches like patient little judges waiting for somebody else's bad fortune. The village around you still sleeps beneath soot-black rafters and sagging thatch roofs. Though not deeply, hunger keeps people half awake these days. You probably would not last a week out here, honestly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time as well. Somewhere out there, another tired soul is probably listening beside their own quiet little candle. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The frost bites your fingers almost at once as you step farther into the narrow field. Last year the wheat stood waist-high here, golden and dry beneath a forgiving autumn sun. Now the ground looks sickly. Pale shoots cling weakly to the soil, thin as old thread. Rain drowned part of the crop weeks ago, and what survived afterward blackened under an early frost. No one can quite agree whether the weather itself turned against the valley, or whether God simply grew weary of hearing villagers complain during Mass. Some swear the trouble began when lightning struck the old oak beside the stream last midsummer. Others blame the strange red moon that hung over the abbey during harvest. Even now, it's hard to tell whether famine arrives all at once or slips quietly into a village like damp creeping beneath a door. You crouch low beside the brittle stalks and rub the earth between your fingers. It feels cold and greasy, heavy with too much rain. Nearby, old Martin from the next croft coughs into his wool sleeve while tugging at a stubborn turnip root no bigger than an onion. His beard carries bits of frozen straw. He does not complain aloud. Medieval peasants conserve energy the way dragons supposedly conserve gold. The village rooster finally cries from somewhere behind the cottages, though weakly, as if even the rooster skipped supper. You make your way toward home along a narrow footpath lined with thorn hedges. Your cottage leans slightly to one side, its roof patched with uneven bundles of thatch darkened by months of smoke and rain. Thin light glows through the shutter cracks. Inside, warmth waits, but only barely. The door groans open beneath your hand. A small fire crackles low in the hearth, fed more by damp peat than proper wood. Smoke gathers stubbornly among the rafters before escaping through a crooked hole overhead. Rushes cover the packed earth floor, though they have not been changed in some time. The sweet herbs scattered among them last summer are long gone now, replaced mostly by the smell of wet wool and old ash. Your wife stirs a pot of morning pottage with slow determination. The pottage contains oats, onion scraps, and perhaps 3 hopeful memories of cabbage. Thick breakfasts belong to richer households these days. A child sleeps beneath wool blankets near the hearth, curled beside the same half-burned beeswax candle used night after night. Wax is precious now. Even monastery servants trim candles smaller than usual. You sit heavily on the rough wooden bench while warming your hands above the weak flames. The bowl placed before you is shallow, very shallow, suspiciously shallow, really. The sort of bowl that inspires a man to stare thoughtfully into it and wonder whether hunger itself might eventually become a flavour. Still, the warmth helps. Outside, the village slowly wakes. Doors creak open. Somewhere nearby, someone chops frozen wood. A woman curses softly at a stubborn goat. Iron pots clatter. Distant bells from the abbey mark the hour again, their sound carrying across the frost-covered fields. Time in the village belongs to bells more than clocks. Bells wake you, feed you, summon you to prayer, warn you of fire, death, raids, storms, or wandering tax collectors which, for many peasants, ranked very near the other disasters. You pull your fur-lined cloak tighter around your shoulders before stepping back outside. Smoke rises lazily from cottage chimneys into the pale morning sky. Thin dogs wander the muddy lane sniffing for scraps. One brown animal with torn ears falls into step behind you almost immediately. You've seen him before near the mill. He looks as hungry as everyone else. Children gather near the communal oven carrying bits of barley dough wrapped in cloth. The baker measures flour carefully these days under watchful eyes. More than one villager has accused him of mixing sawdust into the bread. He denies this fiercely, though nobody seems entirely reassured. Near the well, 2 women whisper beside hanging laundry stiff with frost. They stop talking as you pass. Famine changes conversation first. People lower their voices. They count things quietly. Grain, eggs, salted fish, firewood, neighbours. You continue toward the edge of the village where small strips of farmland spread outward beyond a low stone wall. Crows peck among abandoned furrows. A broken cartwheel lies half buried near the ditch, untouched for weeks, because nobody wishes to waste energy repairing it yet. Above the field stands a little roadside shrine dedicated to St. Bridget. Melted candle wax coats the stone ledge beneath her faded figure. Someone left a bundle of dried herbs there during the night tied with red thread to ward away sickness. Such charms remain common despite the priest's complaints. No one can quite agree whether saints dislike folk remedies or quietly tolerate them when winter grows hard. An old woman kneels beside the shrine muttering prayers through cracked lips. Tiny bits of bread rest on the stone before her as an offering. You suspect birds will inherit the miracle before any saint does. The wind sharpens toward midday. Clouds drift low and colourless overhead while villagers spread across the fields attempting work that already feels hopeless. Hoes strike wet earth. Hands gather rotting cabbage leaves. A boy carries water in wooden buckets suspended from a shoulder pole, sloshing half of it onto his boots before reaching the first row. Still, work continues. That is the strange thing about famine. The world does not stop dramatically. There is no trumpet blast announcing doom. People simply wake each morning colder and more tired than before, then continue carrying wood, mending fences, feeding animals, stirring soup, patching roofs, and praying tomorrow feels slightly less empty. By afternoon, snow begins drifting lightly from the clouds. The brown dog still follows you. Snow settles softly across the village by late afternoon, covering the muddy ruts in pale white layers that almost manage to make the world look clean again. Almost. Beneath the thin blanket of snow remain the same hungry cottages, the same failing fields, the same hollow-eyed villagers measuring winter one loaf at a time. The brown dog follows close behind as you cross the lane toward your shed. He pauses occasionally to sniff frozen manure piles with the solemn concentration of a scholar inspecting holy manuscripts. You begin to suspect he has quietly adopted you, which in medieval terms is less a touching emotional moment and more an additional mouth to worry about. Inside the shed hangs the smell of damp wood, mouldy straw, and cold iron tools. Your plough leans crooked against the wall beside a cracked rake handle bound with twine. A sack of oats rests near the corner. Not a large sack, a discouragingly small sack. The kind of sack that makes a man instinctively count family members. You kneel beside it anyway. Carefully, you untie the cord and peer inside. Grain glimmers faintly in the dim light like tiny yellow pebbles. Last year this same sack would have looked embarrassingly ordinary. Now it feels almost sacred. Outside, monastery bells ring again through the falling snow. The bells carry farther during winter. Some swear cold air sharpens holy sounds. Others claim the dead simply listen more carefully once frost reaches the ground. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You retie the sack and lift it carefully onto your shoulder. The weight disappoints you immediately. The manor barn waits at the far side of the village beyond the smithy and the frozen duck pond. Every tenant farmer owes grain to the Lord even during bad harvests. Especially during bad harvests. Truthfully, lords have large halls to maintain, servants to feed, horses to stable, and guests to impress with dramatic displays of roasted meat beneath colourful banners. Nobility rarely enjoys appearing hungry in public. The road to the barn churns beneath boots and cartwheels into a cold grey paste. Villagers move slowly along it carrying sacks, baskets, bundles of dried peas, or cages holding nervous chickens. Nobody speaks loudly. Near the smithy, sparks burst from the open doorway into the snowy dusk. The blacksmith works stripped to his linen shirt despite the cold, hammering horseshoes beside glowing coals while sweat pours down his temples. His apprentice pumps the bellows with exhausted rhythm. Iron work never truly stops in winter. Broken hinges, snapped plough blades, bent nails, cracked pots, hard seasons create endless repairs. The blacksmith catches sight of your grain sack and gives a grim little nod. No words needed. At the duck pond, children slide cautiously across thin ice while their mother shouts warnings from the bank. Medieval childhood contains surprisingly few safety regulations. Mostly it relies on loud mothers and divine mercy. You pass beneath the wooden arch marking the manor grounds just as daylight fades entirely. Torches flicker beside the gatehouse walls, casting orange light across snow and wet stone. The manor itself rises beyond the yard, thick oak doors, narrow windows glowing with candlelight, smoke curling from high chimneys into the darkening sky. A pair of mounted guards watch the arriving villagers with bored expressions. Fur cloaks drape over their shoulders. One guard chews roasted chestnuts while the other warms gloved hands above a brazier. The smell alone nearly stops you walking. Chestnuts. Roasted meat. Fresh bread somewhere inside the hall. Your stomach tightens sharply. The barn stands beside the granary, massive and shadowed beneath heavy beams darkened by decades of smoke and weather. Lanterns sway gently at the entrance while villagers line up in silence carrying their offerings. Inside, stewards weigh grain carefully upon iron scales. Very carefully. Suspiciously carefully. A thin clerk sits at a rough table scratching records onto parchment with an ink-stained quill. He squints constantly, either from poor eyesight or lifelong disappointment. Candles drip wax beside him while piles of tally sticks cover the tabletop. Each farmer steps forward, empties grain into measuring bins, then waits while the steward announces the amount owed. Some leave looking relieved. Most do not. When your turn arrives, you lift the sack onto the platform with stiff arms. Grain rustles softly as the steward loosens the cord and inspects the contents. His fingers move through the oats like a jeweller judging gemstones. "Poor quality," he mutters. You resist the urge to point out that famine rarely produces premium merchandise. The clerk scratches notes onto parchment. A second steward measures the grain with wooden scoops while murmuring numbers under his breath. Nearby hangs the Lord's banner, a faded stag embroidered upon dark cloth. Mice have nibbled one corner. Even noble banners suffer during hard winters. The steward announces the owed portion without looking at you. Too much. Of course it is too much. You explain quietly about the frost, the flooded lower field, the blackened wheat shoots. Around you, other villagers stare fixedly at the floorboards. Everyone has already spoken these same excuses. The steward sighs. Not cruelly, just tired. He has heard all this before. At last he removes a slightly smaller measure than expected, though not generously. You bow your head in thanks anyway, because survival often depends upon recognizing when humiliation costs less than defiance. The remaining grain feels heartbreakingly light when returned to your arms. As you step aside, old Martin argues with another steward nearby. His harvest failed almost entirely. 2 miserable turnips roll loose from his basket onto the straw-covered floor. The clerk watches expressionlessly while Martin pleads. No one can quite agree whether manor clerks are born without pity, or whether years of counting debts slowly scrape softness away from them like rust from iron. Eventually the steward waves Martin onward with only a partial payment accepted. Martin looks neither grateful nor relieved, just emptied. You leave the barn slowly beneath swinging lantern light. Snow thickens outside. The brown dog waits beside the doorway, curled tightly against the cold as if he belongs there. When he sees you emerge, his tail thumps once against the snow. You scratch behind his ears absent-mindedly. His fur feels rough beneath your fingers. Across the manor yard, music drifts faintly from the Lord's Hall, a harp perhaps. Laughter follows soon after, warm and distant through the timber walls. Servants carry baskets of firewood inside while kitchen boys hurry across the yard balancing covered pots that release wonderful smells into the freezing air. Onion broth, roasted bird, fresh ale. For a moment, the entire courtyard smells like a feast. Then the wind changes. The smells vanish into snow and chimney smoke. You pull your cloak tighter and begin the long walk home through the dark village lanes. Lanterns flicker dimly behind shuttered windows. Somewhere ahead, the abbey bells ring the evening hour once more. The dog trots faithfully at your heels. The snow turns to rain sometime after nightfall, and by morning the village roads have become rivers of brown slush once again. Water drips steadily from thatch roofs into muddy puddles below, each drop sounding strangely loud in the cold dawn quiet. The world smells of wet wool, smoke, soaked hay, and earth churned open by too many boots. You wake before the bells. Not because you are well rested. Hunger simply teaches the body strange habits. Sleep becomes lighter during famine, as though your bones themselves remain alert for danger. The half-burned beeswax candle beside the hearth has finally given out during the night. Thin grey light now slips through the shutters instead, pale and watery as old milk. Your wife kneels beside the fire, coaxing damp twigs into flame while muttering under her breath about the weather, the grain, and perhaps the entire structure of creation itself. The brown dog sleeps curled near the doorway. At some point he has plainly decided this cottage belongs to him now. You cannot entirely blame him. Even weak fires beat freezing ditches. Breakfast consists of yesterday's pottage reheated with a few scraps of onion, and something that may once have been cabbage. Medieval cooking occasionally asks a great deal from the imagination. Still, warmth spreads slowly through your hands as you hold the wooden bowl close. Today is market day. Normally market days carry excitement into the valley, merchants arriving with wool, salt, fish, tools, ribbons, candles, spices, pilgrims' badges, bolts of cloth, and gossip from distant roads. But famine changes markets too. People travel farther, bargain harder, and watch one another with nervous eyes. You wrap your cloak tightly and prepare to leave before sunrise. The road to town stretches several muddy miles beyond the village, following frozen fields, hedgerows, and patches of dripping woodland. Other villagers join the route gradually as dawn brightens the sky, old Martin carrying a basket of shriveled turnips, a widow with 2 geese tied together by the feet, 3 boys pushing a cart full of firewood, and a thin cooper hoping to trade repaired barrels for grain. Nobody walks quickly. Mud sees to that. The road itself resembles thick oat porridge left too long over the fire. Your boots sink with each step. Cartwheels groan. Horses snort clouds of steam into the icy air. Crows watch from fence posts with professional interest. Beside the road stands a weathered shrine built into an oak tree. Tiny offerings crowd the shelf beneath its painted St. Candle stubs, dried flowers, bits of ribbon, even a cracked egg carefully placed upon a folded cloth. Someone recently nailed a tiny iron horseshoe above the image to ward off wandering spirits. Some swear hungry winters attract restless souls from old battlefields hidden beneath the hills. Others insist the noises heard at night come merely from foxes. Even now, it is hard to tell whether fear spreads faster than famine or simply walks beside it. You stop briefly near the shrine while old Martin mutters a prayer. Rainwater drips from his hood into his beard. I heard 3 children died near the eastern villages, he says quietly. You nod without answering. Numbers feel dangerous lately. Every family counts losses differently. The road narrows as it enters the forest track. Bare branches arch overhead, dripping cold water onto cloaks and shoulders. Moss clings thickly to stones beside the path. Somewhere deeper among the trees, an axe strikes wood with slow, hollow echoes. Charcoal burners live out here in rough camps through much of the year. Smoke sometimes rises among the pines where blackened kilns smoulder quietly day and night, turning timber into charcoal for smiths and monasteries. Villagers often distrust charcoal burners slightly. Anyone willing to live alone in cold forests breathing smoke for months naturally invites rumours. One tale claims charcoal burners can speak with wolves. Another insists they steal children. A third claims they merely smell terrible. That last one is certainly true. Near midday, the forest opens onto low hills overlooking the town below. Stone walls surround it in uneven circles, broken by squat gate towers and patched sections where repairs never quite finished properly. Smoke rises from hundreds of chimneys into the grey sky above. The market square lies somewhere within. So do bread ovens. You pick up your pace instinctively. The closer you draw to town, the busier the road becomes. Merchants pass with mule trains loaded by covered sacks. Pilgrims wrapped in muddy cloaks carry staffs decorated with little tin badges from distant shrines. A monk rides slowly upon a patient donkey while reading from a small prayer book despite the rain. How he avoids riding directly into ditches remains a mystery known only to monks and possibly saints. At the gatehouse, guards inspect wagons entering town. Market tolls must be paid. Always. The guards wear damp wool cloaks darkened by rain and carry long spears slick with water. One sits beneath a little wooden shelter, warming hands over a brazier, while another questions arriving merchants. You wait among villagers and traders while carts creak slowly forward one by one. Nearby, a fishmonger argues furiously about taxes on smoked eels. The guard looks unimpressed. A pig escapes from somebody's cart moments later, charging directly through the muddy queue with remarkable confidence. 3 boys chase after it while slipping repeatedly into puddles. Even the guards laugh at that. The pig nearly wins. By the time you finally pass through the gate arch, rainwater drips steadily from your sleeves and boots. Inside the walls, narrow streets twist between timber houses leaning overhead so closely that upper windows nearly touch. Town smells strike immediately. Wood smoke, horse dung, wet leather, allaire, fish. Too many people crowded too closely together. And beneath it all, the rich drifting scent of fresh bread. Your stomach tightens again. Market stalls spread across the square beneath striped awnings darkened by rain. Merchants shout prices over one another while bells ring from the church tower nearby. Chickens squawk from wicker cages, dogs bark beneath carts. Peddlers wave charms against illness, bad luck, tooth pain, curses, and unwanted pregnancies, though perhaps not all at once. You move slowly through the crowd beside old Martin. People everywhere are buying smaller amounts than usual. Half loaves, single onions, tiny sacks of flour. A woman haggles fiercely over 2 smoked herrings while clutching 3 copper coins like treasure. Near the centre of the square stands a baker's stall surrounded by villagers waiting silently in line beneath the rain. The loaves look smaller than last season. The prices look larger. Rain drizzles steadily over the market square while villagers crowd beneath dripping awnings clutching baskets, purses, and little scraps of hope. Water runs between cobblestones in narrow grey streams carrying straw, mud, and cabbage leaves toward the gutters. Somewhere nearby, church bells toll the late morning hour, their heavy notes rolling above the noise of merchants and livestock. The line before the baker's stall barely moves. You stand among soaked cloaks and steaming breath while the smell of fresh bread drifts cruelly through the damp air. Hunger sharpens scent in strange ways. Under ordinary circumstances you might notice smoke first, or rain, or horse manure. During famine, bread announces itself from half a street away like a holy vision. The baker works behind rough wooden boards stacked with coarse loaves made mostly from barley and rye. Wheat bread belongs to monasteries, noble tables, and people who no longer glance nervously at winter clouds. Even these darker loaves look smaller than last year, dense and heavy enough to stun a goose if thrown properly. Some whisper bakers mix bean flour into the dough now. Others claim ground acorns. One particularly suspicious man insists certain bakers stretch flour with powdered bark. No one has caught them doing so yet, though many villagers chew thoughtfully while staring into middle distance afterward. The woman ahead of you in line counts coins repeatedly with trembling fingers. A child wrapped in wool blankets leans against her hip half asleep. At last she receives a loaf scarcely larger than both hands together. She leaves looking relieved anyway. That is the thing about famine. Expectations shrink quietly alongside meals. When your turn comes, the baker barely looks up. His face shines with sweat despite the cold. Flour dust clings thickly to his beard and sleeves. "Price rose again this morning," he mutters. "Of course it did. Everything rises except spirits and crop yields." You place coins carefully onto the wet counter. The baker weighs them with practiced suspicion before handing over a dark loaf wrapped in cloth. Warmth still lingers inside it. For a moment your hands simply remain there holding the bread. The scent nearly makes you dizzy. Behind you, two men immediately begin arguing over cue positions. Medieval lines possess all the quiet dignity of drunken geese. You move aside before fists become involved. Near the church wall, beggars huddle beneath patched cloaks holding wooden bowls toward passers-by. One old man rings a tiny handbell while reciting prayers for generous souls. Another displays a pilgrim badge from Santiago pinned proudly to his chest despite shoes that barely remain attached to his feet. Pilgrims often receive more kindness than ordinary beggars. People trust travellers with holy destinations. Mostly, though some swear half the pilgrims wandering famine roads are simply hungry men with convincing stories and excellent walking sticks. You break a small piece from the loaf while crossing the square. Steam curls faintly from the soft centre. The brown dog beside you watches with heartbreaking concentration. Naturally you share. He swallows the bread in one bite, then looks immediately prepared for additional charity. A nearby fishmonger snorts at this. "You feed dogs before yourself?" he asks. You shrug. The fishmonger rearranges smoked herrings across damp cloth, while flies somehow continue existing despite the weather. Medieval flies possess alarming dedication. "Dog'll follow you forever now," he says. The dog already seems to understand this arrangement perfectly. You continue deeper into the market where stalls crowd tightly together beneath colourful awnings. Candle makers sell narrow tallow candles beside far more expensive beeswax ones, reserved mostly for churches and wealthy households. A cooper displays repaired barrels. Fur traders hang rabbit pelts dripping rainwater. Apothecaries arrange jars filled with herbs, oils, dried roots, and mysterious powders guaranteed to solve ailments ranging from coughs to demonic interference. One elderly healer waves you toward her table. "For weak lungs and winter chills," she says, shaking a pouch of dried herbs. "What is it?" "Mostly thyme." "Mostly?" She smiles without answering. Best not to investigate further. Beside her stall hangs bunches of garlic tied with red cord against evil spirits. Folk remedies fill every corner of medieval life. Herbs beneath pillows to prevent nightmares. Rowan branches above doors to stop witches entering. Little charms sewn into clothing to ward off fever. No one can quite agree where medicine ends and superstition begins. Most villagers simply use both and hope something works. You pause near the cloth market where merchants from distant towns display wool dyed deep green, rust red, and faded blue. Rich colours still survive even in hungry winters. A noblewoman passes nearby wrapped in fur-lined garments so thick and elegant she resembles an extremely wealthy bear. Her servants carry baskets behind her. One contains oranges. Actual oranges. Several villagers stare openly as she passes. You suspect half the square briefly contemplates robbery. At the far end of the market stands the grain exchange beneath a timber roof. Farmers and merchants cluster there, speaking in low, worried voices, while scribes record prices onto wax tablets. Grain costs climb almost daily now. A thin monk copies figures carefully with ink-blackened fingers, while muttering calculations under his breath. His robe hem drags through mud unnoticed. The numbers plainly trouble him. They trouble everyone. You overhear fragments while passing. Poor harvests north of the river. Flooded mills near the coast. Bandits stealing grain carts along the western road. spoiled storehouses, sick livestock. Some swear ships carrying rye vanished entirely during autumn storms. Others blame corrupt merchants hoarding supplies. Even now, it is hard to tell where truth ends and rumour begins once people grow hungry enough. The church bells ring again overhead. By midday the rain finally weakens into mist. Smoke drifts from cookshops lining the square where labourers crowd shoulder to shoulder, eating onion broth and thick bean stew from wooden bowls. You spend one precious coin on hot ale mixed with honey and herbs. The warmth spreads through your chest almost painfully. Beside the cookshop fire, travellers exchange news from distant roads. A carter claims entire villages farther east survive now on nettle soup and boiled roots. Another man insists wolves follow travellers unusually close this winter. Too many bodies in the forests, someone mutters. Silence follows briefly after that. The brown dog rests beneath your bench chewing crumbs from the mud. You tear another piece from the bread slowly this time, forcing yourself not to finish it all immediately. Hunger teaches caution eventually, either that or misery with excellent organisational skills. Across the square, clouds darken again over the town walls. More rain approaches. The rain returns before long, sweeping across the market square in cold silver sheets that send merchants scrambling beneath canvas awnings. Water drums against wooden stalls and splashes from crowded gutters, while townsfolk hunch deeper into cloaks already soaked through from earlier showers. You leave the market slowly with the loaf tucked safely beneath your arm beneath layers of cloth. The brown dog trots close beside your boots, stopping only to investigate promising smells near butcher stalls or abandoned cabbage leaves floating through puddles. The town grows dimmer as afternoon fades. Torches flicker to life one by one along narrow streets, their flames wavering orange against wet stone walls. Smoke thickens overhead beneath the low clouds. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith hammers iron with steady ringing blows that echo between buildings like distant bells. You pass beneath a timber gallery where wool merchants store bales above the street. Rainwater drips from the beams onto your hood, while voices murmur behind shuttered windows overhead. Towns always feel strangely crowded during hard winters. Too many bodies pressed close together. Too many eyes watching food baskets. At the end of a crooked lane stands an alehouse called the Three Herrings, though nobody can explain where the third herring went. The painted sign swings above the doorway, creaking in the wind while yellow firelight glows warmly through smoke-clouded windows. Warmth draws people the way lanterns draw moths. You duck inside. Heat strikes immediately. Not pleasant heat exactly. Alehouse heat. Thick, smoky, crowded heat flavoured with wet wool, onions, peat smoke, spilled ale, damp leather, and humanity in large quantities. Rushes cover the floor beneath muddy boots. Candlelight flickers across soot-black rafters overhead, while conversation hums through the room in tired, uneven waves. At least 20 people crowd the benches. Labourers, travellers, merchants, a pair of monks, 3 men who look suspiciously like sheep thieves, and one elderly woman asleep beside the hearth holding an empty cup like a sacred relic. The innkeeper glances up from filling mugs behind the counter. "You buying or freezing?" he asks. A fair question. You spend another coin carefully on a bowl of onion broth and weak ale. The broth contains more steam than substance, though at this point even hot water feels emotionally supportive. You settle onto a bench near the fire while the dog curls beneath the table almost instantly. Clearly he has extensive experience with taverns. Nearby, 2 merchants argue quietly over grain prices in the northern towns. "Double by Candlemas," one mutters. "Triple if roads freeze." A third man snorts into his cup. If roads freeze, prices won't matter. We'll all chew tree bark together like noble forest spirits." Several people laugh softly at that. Medieval humour improves noticeably after ale. A serving girl passes carrying trenchers of stew toward a table of carters near the back wall. Steam rises from the bowls rich with cabbage and beans. One lucky bastard even appears to have sausage. You try not to stare. The monks near the hearth speak in low voices about the abbey storehouses outside town. One complains that desperate villagers now arrive daily begging for grain or bread. The other insists charity must continue regardless. Until the stores fail entirely, asks the first monk. Neither answers after that. Rain rattles hard against the shutters. A travelling peddler seated beside you begins describing strange happenings from villages farther west. His beard forks in two uneven grey points, and his boots appear held together primarily by mud. "They buried 3 folk in 1 week, he says quietly. Then cows stopped giving milk. After that, old Marta swore she saw blue lights moving over the marsh. A labourer rolls his eyes. "Marsh gas." "Spirits?" says the peddler stubbornly. No one can quite agree whether marsh spirits prefer hungry villages or merely enjoy damp weather, mutters another man into his ale. That earns a few tired chuckles. The peddler leans closer anyway. "They say famine weakens the veil." You're not entirely certain what veil he means, but medieval people enjoy mysterious veils immensely. Invisible barriers between worlds apparently lurk everywhere: forests, crossroads, wells, monasteries, old hills, suspicious ponds. Frankly, it is amazing anyone sleeps at all. The innkeeper tosses fresh peat onto the fire. Smoke rolls upward into the rafters while sparks crackle brightly for a moment. Candle shadows dance along the walls. Outside, wind howls down the street carrying rain against the shutters, hard enough to make several guests glance nervously toward the door. Storms feel different during famine. Everything does. A young mother enters carrying a bundled child wrapped tightly beneath wool blankets. Water drips from her cloak onto the rush-covered floor. The room quiets briefly while she approaches the hearth. The child coughs weakly. An old woman nearby immediately presses a little leather charm into the mother's hand. "For fever," she whispers. The mother accepts it gratefully. Inside, the charm hangs dried lavender and tiny scraps of written prayer sealed with wax. Some swear written prayers work better once folded many times, because evil spirits grow confused trying to unfold them. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how intelligent evil spirits actually are. You sip slowly at the hot broth while warmth gradually returns to your fingers. Hours pass gently inside the tavern haze. People eat, talk, complain softly, dry cloaks near the fire. A fiddler eventually appears from somewhere near the back wall and begins playing quiet tunes that drift through the smoky room like half-remembered dreams. Several travellers hum along under their breath. Outside, darkness settles fully over the town. The bells ring vespers from the church tower. You realise suddenly how late it has become. The road home through forest mud would be miserable at best and dangerous at worst in this weather. Bandits sometimes haunt the outer roads during winter. Hungry men grow bold once snow arrives. The innkeeper notices your glance toward the shutters. "Floor space near the hearth for a penny," he says. "Straw costs extra." Naturally, straw cost extra. Somewhere in heaven, saints probably maintain detailed records of medieval overcharging. Still, you nod. The thought of walking back through rain-soaked darkness loses appeal immediately once you picture warm walls and a dry corner beside the fire. The dog lifts his head sleepily beneath the table as though fully approving this decision. Outside, the storm deepens over the town while the tavern fire crackles low and steady into the night. By the time the alehouse shutters close against the storm, the air inside has grown thick enough to chew. Smoke drifts heavily beneath the rafters while damp cloaks steam beside the hearth. Most travellers settle where they can: benches, corners, patches of rush-covered floor, even beneath tables if ale has rendered them flexible enough. You sleep lightly for a few hours with your cloak wrapped tight around your shoulders and the brown dog pressed warmly against your boots. Somewhere during the night a drunk merchant sings half a ballad about a saint and a goose before forgetting both the tune and the saint entirely. Then dawn arrives grey and wet once more. The innkeeper bangs pots together to wake everyone with all the tenderness of a siege commander. You rise stiffly beside the fading fire while travellers groan and stretch around the room. A monk snores softly against the wall, one sandal missing, nearby. Two carters argue about whose turn it was to feed the horses. Outside, rain has weakened into cold mist. The streets glisten beneath pale morning light as you step back into the town. Smoke curls from chimneys overhead. Market workers already drag carts through muddy lanes, while bakers carry fresh loaves toward their stalls beneath cloth coverings. The smell nearly stops you again. Medieval towns should really issue emotional warnings beside bakeries during famine. You tighten your cloak and begin walking uphill toward the abbey. The monks last night mentioned travellers receiving shelter there, and more importantly, perhaps a little food. Abbeys often serve as islands of order during hard winters. Their walls are thick, their bells reliable, and their storehouses usually better managed than those of ordinary villages. Usually, the road climbs steadily past workshops and narrow houses toward higher ground overlooking the town. Water drips from stone gutters shaped like snarling beasts. Laundry hangs limp between upper windows despite the weather. A pig roots happily beside a ditch with the confidence of a creature entirely unconcerned about taxes or crop failure. Lucky animal. Above the rooftops rises the abbey itself, broad stone walls darkened by rain, narrow arched windows, and a bell tower stretching into the mist. Moss clings thickly between the old stones. Ravens perch along the roofline watching the town below like elderly monks judging humanity. The abbey bells ring prime just as you reach the outer gate. Deep, slow, measured. Monastery bells divide the day more faithfully than kings divide kingdoms. At the gatehouse, a lay brother wrapped in dark wool examines arriving travellers beneath a covered archway. His hands are red from cold. Beside him stands a wooden barrel collecting rainwater from the roof. Several poor villagers wait nearby holding bowls or sacks hopefully. The brother notices your approach. You seek alms or lodging. Both, if God remains generous. He snorts softly at that. God perhaps, Brother Anselm less so. Still, he waves you inside. The abbey courtyard smells wonderfully of wet stone, wood smoke, candle wax, and fresh bread cooling somewhere nearby. Monks cross the yard silently beneath black cloaks carrying baskets, scrolls, bundles of firewood, and armfuls of herbs hanging upside down to dry. Everything here moves with quiet purpose. Even the chickens seem disciplined. You follow the lay brother through a cloister walk where rain taps softly beyond rows of stone arches. Water gathers in the central garden around bare winter herbs and a small frozen fountain. Candles flicker inside nearby windows illuminating shelves of books and hunched scribes bending over parchment. Ink-stained monks always appear slightly haunted. Perhaps copying scripture by candlelight eventually does that to a man. The guest house lies beside the outer wall, separated from the monks' private quarters. Pilgrims, traders, wandering labourers, and the occasional exhausted farmer often sleep here during poor weather. Inside, warmth greets you immediately. Not luxurious warmth. Abbey warmth. Clean straw. Dry walls. thick soup simmering somewhere nearby. Practically paradise. A fire burns steadily beneath a wide chimney, while travellers sit quietly upon benches warming hands around wooden bowls. The room smells of onions, leeks, damp wool, and beeswax candles. A monk ladles pottage from a great iron pot. You receive a bowl along with a heel of coarse bread scarcely larger than your palm. Yet compared to recent meals, it feels magnificent. The brown dog settles beside the hearth with a sigh, so contented it nearly sounds religious. You eat slowly while studying the guest house around you. A pair of pilgrims dry muddy cloaks beside the fire. Tiny tin badges hang from their hats showing saints from shrines hundreds of miles away. One old traveller rubs aching knees with garlic oil while muttering prayers against stiffness. A merchant counts coins beneath the table with extraordinary secrecy considering everyone can plainly hear the counting. Near the far wall, a young monk copies names into a ledger. Guests, donations, perhaps deaths as well. No one can quite agree how monasteries maintain so many records without eventually losing their minds among parchment piles. Outside, the wind rises again, rattling shutters softly. You finish the soup carefully, scraping the bowl nearly clean with bread. Beside you, an elderly pilgrim begins speaking about relics kept inside the abbey church. They have a finger bone from St. Aldwyn, he whispers. Supposedly, the merchant nearby snorts. Supposedly from 3 different saints in 3 different abbeys. The pilgrim shrugs peacefully. One cannot have too many holy fingers. Fair point, honestly. Relics comfort people during famine. Bones of saints, splinters from holy crosses, bottles of sacred oil, pilgrim badges pinned to cloaks, tiny written prayers folded into lockets, when fields fail and children cough through winter nights. People reach for whatever small certainty they can carry. A bell rings again somewhere deeper inside the abbey. The monks move immediately. One closes his ledger. Another rises from the fire. Prayer hours shape every corner of monastic life. Bells for waking, bells for work, bells for meals, bells for prayer, bells for sleep. A monastery measures time the way farmers measure weather carefully and constantly. The lay brother returns carrying fresh rushes for the floor. Storm worsens tonight, he says. Roads north may flood by morning. Travellers exchange uneasy looks. You glance toward the hearth where the dog sleeps curled tightly beside glowing embers. For now at least, the walls are dry. The soup is warm. And the bells continue faithfully through the rain-dark afternoon. Evening settles slowly over the abbey guest house while rain whispers steadily against the outer walls. The fire burns lower now, glowing deep orange beneath a crust of grey ash. Shadows stretch long across the rush-covered floor where travellers shift quietly beneath wool blankets and patched cloaks. The guest house feels calmer after sunset. Not cheerful exactly, just softened. Outside. The storm keeps the world small. The bells ring compline from the abbey church, their final notes lingering through wet darkness like ripples across still water. Somewhere in the cloister, monks chant evening prayers in low, measured voices almost too distant to hear clearly. The sound drifts through the stone halls like warm smoke. You settle deeper against the wall near the hearth with the brown dog curled beside your legs. Someone tossed him scraps earlier, and he now regards the abbey with complete spiritual loyalty. A novice monk passes through carrying beeswax candles upon a wooden tray. Their golden light flickers across tired faces, pilgrims rubbing sore feet, merchants counting diminished coins, labourers drying soaked boots beside the fire. One old traveller removes his stockings carefully and groans loud enough to concern nearby saints. "Road's cursed," he mutters. "No," replies another man sleepily, "our road's muddy." Same thing. A few quiet chuckles ripple through the room. At the far end of the guest house, the young monk with the ledger sits beside a narrow table trimming quills with a small knife. Tiny curls of feather drift onto the wood beside ink pots and parchment scraps. He looks barely older than 16. His fingers are stained black to the knuckles. You wonder briefly whether monastery scribes eventually begin bleeding ink instead of blood. The monk glances up unexpectedly. You came from the southern valley. You nod. How bad? The question hangs heavily for a moment. You answer honestly. Worse than autumn, better than next month. The monk lowers his eyes again without replying. Nearby, a woman travelling with 2 children unwraps a bundle of dried apples from cloth and divides them carefully into tiny portions. Her youngest son stares at the fruit with solemn awe usually reserved for miracles. Famine changes the value of ordinary things. A crust of bread, dry boots, a spoonful of honey, an apple shared beside a fire. These become treasures. The abbey servant eventually brings fresh pottage once more, thinner now but still hot. Steam curls upward, carrying the scent of leeks and barley. Wooden bowls pass from hand to hand around the room, while travellers murmur thanks. You eat slowly again. Always slowly. People who grow hungry learn strange rituals around food. Small bites, long chewing, saving crumbs, watching bowls as though they might refill themselves through prayer alone. Outside, wind rattles the shutters sharply. One pilgrim near the hearth immediately traces a protective sign against evil spirits. Some swear storms carry wandering souls across lonely roads during winter nights. Others insist demons dislike church bells and avoid monasteries entirely. No one can quite agree whether the bells protect the abbey or merely warn spirits where the warmest fire can be found. The old pilgrim from earlier begins telling stories after supper while travellers settle for the night. His voice creaks like old floorboards, soft but steady. He speaks of distant shrines where blind men supposedly regained sight, of rivers freezing solid enough for entire armies to cross, of a village where bread once fell from the sky during a famine after prayers to St. Cuthbert. A merchant listening nearby mutters into his cup, "If bread starts falling from the heavens, I hope it lands buttered." That earns another tired laugh. The stories continue anyway. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how much of pilgrimage lore is miracle, and how much is simply travellers growing lonely beside cold roads. Still, nobody interrupts. Stories warm people almost as effectively as fires. The rain finally weakens near midnight. Silence spreads gradually through the guest house, as one traveller after another drifts asleep. The monk extinguishes several candles until only a few remain glowing near the hearth. You lie wrapped in your cloak, staring upward toward the soot-dark rafters. The abbey smells different at night. Cool stone, wet wool, ash, old wood, melted wax, and beneath it all, faint traces of lavender scattered among the rushes to sweeten the air. The brown dog twitches occasionally in sleep beside you, paws moving softly against the floor as if chasing rabbits through dream fields luckier than these. A man snores near the doorway with astonishing determination. Somewhere outside, water drips steadily from the cloister roof into the frozen fountain below. Time slows. This is how medieval nights often pass, listening more than speaking, hearing boots settle against straw, listening to firewood collapse into embers, waiting through darkness while bells divide the hours unseen beyond thick stone walls. At some point you drift half asleep yourself, then wake suddenly. Not from noise exactly, from absence. The fire has burned low. Cold creeps gradually back through the room. Moonlight now slips faintly through the shutters where clouds have finally broken apart overhead. Several travellers stir uneasily nearby. The young monk rises quietly from his bench and adds wood to the embers. Sparks burst upward, briefly illuminating his tired face before fading again. He notices you awake. "Couldn't sleep," he whispers. You shrug. "Hunger?" The monk nods once as though understanding completely. After a moment, he reaches into his sleeve and produces a tiny piece of hard cheese wrapped carefully in cloth. "Kitchen stores," he says quietly. "Do not tell Brother Anselm." You accept it with genuine gratitude. The cheese tastes sharp and salty and impossibly rich after weeks of thin meals. Even the smallest bite feels luxurious. Somewhere deep within the abbey, a bell rings softly for the night office. The monk rises immediately. Duty before sleep. Always. You watch him disappear into the corridor, carrying candlelight into darkness, while the guest house settles once more into silence. Outside, the storm has finally passed. Frost gathers quietly upon the abbey roofs beneath a pale winter moon. Before dawn fully arrives, the abbey bells begin again. Their deep iron voices roll through the cold darkness one measured note at a time, stirring travellers from uneasy sleep beneath wool blankets and damp cloaks. Frost now coats the outer windows in pale silver patterns. The storm has passed entirely, leaving the world brittle and still. You rise stiffly from the rush-covered floor while the guest house remains half-shadowed in candlelight. Nearby, pilgrims groan softly while rubbing sore knees and swollen feet. One merchant mutters something deeply unholy about monastery floors before remembering where he is and hastily crossing himself. The brown dog stretches beside the hearth with dramatic dedication, front paws extended far forward as though preparing personally for battle against winter itself. A lay brother enters carrying a lantern and a basket of coarse bread. "Eat now," he says quietly. "Roads freeze hard before sunrise." Nobody needs convincing. Travellers gather around the remaining warmth of the fire while dividing breakfast carefully into small portions. You receive another heel of dark bread along with weak ale warmed by the kitchen embers. The bread feels hard enough to reinforce castle walls, but it fills the stomach better than air. Outside the guest-house door, the abbey courtyard glimmers beneath frost. Every sound sharpens in cold weather. Boots crunch upon frozen ground. Ravens call from the bell tower. Somewhere deeper inside the monastery, monks chant prayers in slow Latin rhythms drifting through the dawn mist. The world feels suspended between sleep and waking. You pull your cloak tighter and step out into the courtyard with the others preparing to leave. Thin smoke rises from abbey chimneys into the pale sky. Frost clings to herb gardens beneath the cloister arches. The frozen fountain at the centre of the yard now wears a delicate skin of ice. A novice sweeps snow from the stone path with sleepy determination. Even monasteries cannot pray dirt away forever. Before departing, many travellers pause beside the abbey church doors. Some kneel briefly. Others touch the worn stone for luck. A woman presses 2 fingers against a carved saint beside the entrance before whispering a prayer for her sick daughter. You do the same almost without thinking. Cold stone meets colder fingertips. No one can quite agree whether saints listen more carefully during famine or whether hungry people simply pray louder. Then the road calls again. The forest track north of town lies hard and white beneath morning frost. Puddles frozen overnight crack softly beneath boots and cart wheels. Bare branches glitter faintly where ice catches the first weak sunlight filtering through clouds. The brown dog trots ahead happily now, delighted by weather that does not involve rain pouring directly into his ears. You travel mostly alone at first, though other figures move through the dawn mist farther along the road, a pair of charcoal burners carrying bundles of wood, 2 pilgrims wrapped heavily against the cold, and a bent old woman leading a stubborn goat by rope. The forest smells clean this morning. frozen moss, pine sap, wood smoke lingering faintly from distant camps. And beneath it all, the sharp mineral scent of winter earth locked hard beneath frost. Birdsong remains scarce, even the crows sound quieter. You pass beneath ancient oaks where travellers have nailed little offerings over the years, scraps of ribbon, tiny carved crosses, bits of antler, rusted horseshoes. Medieval roads collect superstition the way hedges collect snow. Some swear certain trees guard travellers, others insist crossroads attract spirits after sunset. A merchant once claimed hanging wolf teeth beside your doorway prevents nightmares, though perhaps it merely guarantees unusual conversations with neighbours. Farther along the road you find the charcoal burners tending their smoking kiln beside a clearing. Thick grey smoke rises through the trees while one man feeds logs into the earth-covered mound using soot-blackened gloves. The nearer burner nods as you pass. His beard contains enough ash to qualify as part of the kiln itself. Road east washed out yesterday, he warns. Bridge near the marsh collapsed. You thank him. The second burner spits thoughtfully into the snow. Heard wolves last night too. Real wolves. He shrugs. Hunger makes all creatures louder. Fair enough. By mid-morning the sun rises weakly behind thin clouds. Frost begins softening into mud once more beneath wagon tracks. Water drips steadily from tree branches overhead. The road narrows near a small roadside shrine built from stacked stones and roofed with moss-covered timber. Candles flicker weakly inside before a painted image of St. Nicholas darkened by smoke and age. A traveller already kneels there praying quietly. Beside the shrine rests a tiny offering bowl containing walnuts, dried berries, and 3 copper coins. Not much, but during famine, even small gifts carry weight. You pause long enough to warm your hands briefly above the candle flames. Melted wax scents the cold air. The traveller beside you speaks without lifting his head. They say a woman froze near here 3 winters ago. You glance toward the trees. Bandits. Snow. The traveller crosses himself. Some swear her lantern still moves through the forest on storm nights. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the ghost seeks help or merely company. You leave the shrine soon afterward with a dog close behind. By noon the forest thins into open farmland once more. Fields stretch pale and empty beneath low winter skies. Stone cottages crouch beside frozen hedgerows with smoke curling weakly from chimneys. In one distant field, villagers dig stubbornly through icy soil searching for missed turnips after harvest. A grim kind of treasure hunt. You continue walking. Boots muddy again. Hands cold again. Hunger waiting patiently somewhere ahead again. And far behind you now, softened by distance and mist, the abbey bells continue marking the hours no matter who listens. By the time you reach the southern valley again, the sky has lowered into a flat grey sheet, and the road beneath your boots has become half frost, half mud, and wholly unpleasant. The village appears gradually through the mist-crooked thatch roofs, thin chimney smoke, bare orchards, the church tower rising beyond the cottages, and the manor hall crouched above it all on slightly higher ground, as if even buildings understand rank. The brown dog trots beside you with the steady confidence of a creature who has contributed nothing to the journey except morale. Still, morale counts for something. At the village edge, you pass the broken cartwheel lying in the ditch where snow has gathered along its spokes. Someone has tied a strip of red cloth to it, perhaps as a warning, perhaps as a charm. These days the difference grows thin. Some swear red thread turns away bad luck, fever, wandering spirits, and jealous neighbours. No one can quite agree whether it works better when tied properly or when tied by someone truly desperate. Near the well, Villagers gather in quiet knots. News has arrived before you. Manor Court is called. The Lord Steward sits today in the hall to hear complaints, debts, broken obligations, missing animals, unpaid rents, and all the little disasters that famine shakes loose from ordinary life. Nobody loves Manor Court. It is one of those medieval institutions people attend because refusing would make life considerably worse, which is also true of tooth-pulling and certain weddings. You return home only long enough to place the market loaf near the hearth, greet your family softly, and swallow a mouthful of cold pottage. The half-burned candle is gone now, replaced by a rushlight made from dried rush dipped in fat. It burns faintly and smells exactly as romantic as old Greece can manage. Then you go back out. The manor hall fills slowly with villagers tracking mud across the rush-strewn floor. Smoke stains the rafters black above long tables pushed aside for the court. A fire burns near the far wall, though most of its warmth seems reserved for the steward, the clerk, and the two men standing importantly beside them with staffs of office. The steward wears a fur-lined cloak over a dark tunic and looks tired before proceedings even begin. The clerk sits at a small table with parchment, ink, and tally sticks arranged before him. You recognise the same ink-stained patient seen in abbey ledgers, though this clerk's face carries less mercy and more arithmetic. Cases begin. A widow owes 3 hens in rent but owns only 1 hen, and that hen, she explains, has entered a period of spiritual reluctance and refuses to lay. The court debates whether spiritual reluctance counts as hardship. It does not. A young man is fined for cutting wood from the Lord's copse without permission. He claims he took only fallen branches. The forester claims the branches were suspiciously attached to a tree when last seen. A miller is accused of keeping too much flour from the grinding. The miller protests loudly, which impresses no one, because millers are traditionally suspected by everybody. Some swear millers grow rich by stealing from every sack. Others say they are merely dusty, necessary, and unfortunate in reputation. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, especially after paying milling fees. You wait beneath the rafters while smoke stings your eyes. Old Martin stands nearby, clutching his cap between both hands. His face looks smaller somehow, as if hunger has carved sharper lines along his cheeks. At last your own matter is called. The steward asks about rent grain still owed after the poor harvest. The clerk reads the amount from his parchment without looking up. Numbers sound harsher aloud in a warm hall than they do inside your own anxious thoughts. You explain the flooded lower field again, the frost, the blackened wheat, the oats taken yesterday to the manor barn. You speak carefully, humbly, because anger in Manor Court is expensive. Around you, villagers listen without seeming to listen. The steward folds his hands. He has heard the same story from half the parish. For a moment only the fire speaks, snapping softly. Then he grants delay until spring ploughing. Not forgiveness. Delay. A small mercy with a hook still hidden inside it. You bow your head anyway. In famine. Borrowed time is a kind of bread. The clerk scratches the decision onto parchment. The sound of quill on skin feels strangely final. Beside the door, the brown dog waits where he absolutely should not be, having somehow slipped into the hall unnoticed. One of the manor servants tries to shoo him away. The dog refuses with serene dignity until offered a scrap, at which point his principles collapse instantly. More cases follow. A boy is accused of stealing turnips from a neighbour's pit. His mother insists he merely found them. The neighbour insists turnips do not wander into children's hands by moonlight. The steward orders repayment after Lent if any turnips remain in existence by then. This ruling satisfies nobody but ends the matter. 2 brothers argue over a dead sheep. A woman asks permission to glean fallen wood near the riverbank. A carter reports the bridge toward the marsh is damaged, confirming what the charcoal burner said on the forest road. Each small problem gathers into one large truth the village is fraying, thread by thread. Yet the hall remains oddly calm. People speak in low voices, babies fuss, boots scrape, the fire shifts. Outside, bells from the church mark the afternoon hour, dim through thick walls. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the court preserves order or merely teaches everyone to suffer in proper sequence. When the steward finally rises, the villagers begin drifting toward the doors in slow silence. Some leave relieved, some leave worse off, most leave exactly as hungry as before. You step back into the cold yard beneath the sky darkening toward evening. Smoke trails upward from manor chimneys. Somewhere behind the hall, servants laugh near the kitchen door while hauling water. Old Martin walks beside you for a while without speaking. At the lane, he stops. "Spring," he says quietly, as if testing whether the word still means anything. You nod. Spring. The dog presses his muddy nose against your hand. Together you make your way down toward the cottages, where thin fires wait beneath soot-black rafters, and every household counts what little remains. Evening settles early over the village, thick and grey beneath low winter clouds. Smoke hangs close to the rooftops instead of rising cleanly into the sky, trapped by the cold air pressing down upon the valley. From the church tower, the bells ring vespers once again, soft and distant through the damp. You walk home beside old Martin along the muddy lane while the brown dog splashes ahead through puddles with unnecessary enthusiasm. A thin layer of frost has begun forming over the edges of the ditches again, silvering dead weeds and broken fence posts. The village looks smaller in winter. Cottages crouch low beneath their thatched roofs as though trying to hide from the wind. Light glows faintly through shutter cracks. Somewhere nearby, a child cries. Somewhere else, a woman sings softly while stirring supper over a fire. Simple sounds. Tired sounds. Human sounds. Martin pauses beside his gate before turning toward you. "They opened the winter stores today," he says quietly. You nod slowly. That explains the movement near the granary earlier. Every village keeps communal stores if it can manage them: barrels of oats, smoked fish, dried peas, onions hanging in braided ropes, salted pork if fortune has smiled generously that year, which it certainly has not this time. Winter stores are less comforting once people begin measuring them aloud. You part ways beneath the fading light and continue toward the centre of the village. Sure enough, several villagers still linger near the storehouse beside the mill. Lanterns sway outside the timber building, while the reeve and two helpers carry inventory baskets in and out beneath careful watch. Nobody trusts food counts during famine. Not fully. You join the quiet crowd gathered nearby. Inside the storehouse hangs the sharp, dry scent of grain, onions, smoke, and old wood. Shelves line the walls holding sacks, jars, and bundles labelled with charcoal markings. In better years the place might feel abundant. Tonight it feels alarmingly spacious. The reeve stands beside a barrel, scratching notes onto a wax tablet while muttering numbers under his breath. He looks deeply unhappy, which at least suggests honesty. Villagers wait patiently to receive measured portions. Very measured portions. 1 ladle of oats, a handful of peas, a small strip of smoked fish wrapped in cloth. Enough to continue surviving, not enough to stop worrying. You watch as an old woman accepts her portion with both hands trembling slightly. A younger man behind her immediately peers into the barrel as though suspicious the reeve might secretly conceal mountains of grain beneath the visible layer. Sadly, no. The mountain appears to consist mainly of disappointment. Your own turn comes slowly. The reeve recognizes you and sighs before speaking. Bad counts this year. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it keeps being true. Fair enough. He hands over a cloth bundle containing oats, dried peas, and 2 onions scarcely larger than walnuts. You thank him sincerely anyway. During famine, gratitude shrinks alongside expectations. Near the back wall hang several strings of smoked fish darkened almost black by salt and age. A boy beside you stares at them with open reverence. "Think they taste good," he whispers to his mother. "No," she says honestly, "but they taste like food." Hard to argue with that. Outside the storehouse, darkness settles fully across the village. Lantern light flickers against wet ground while villagers drift slowly home carrying tiny parcels beneath cloaks. The brown dog follows close beside your heels. At your cottage, warmth greets you faintly from the hearth. Your wife kneels near the fire, feeding peat into the embers, while the child sleeps beneath blankets bundled beside the wall. The room smells of smoke, damp wool, and onion broth simmering gently in the pot. You place the storehouse bundle carefully onto the table. Together you inspect the contents in silence. 2 onions, some peas, enough oats for perhaps several days if stretched carefully. The smoked fish from the communal rack remains absent, probably reserved for households with more children, or perhaps the reeve feared riots. No one can quite agree how medieval villages decide fairness during famine, because fairness itself becomes slippery once supplies grow thin enough. You help prepare supper while wind rattles softly against the shutters. Peas soak in a wooden bowl beside the fire. 1 onion is chopped carefully into tiny pieces to flavour the broth. Every scrap matters now. Even onion skins sometimes end up back in the pot for extra flavour. You sit beside the hearth while the soup cooks slowly. The child wakes eventually and rubs sleepy eyes beneath tangled hair. When handed a bowl, the poor little thing smiles as though presented with royal treasure. That nearly hurts more than hunger itself. Outside, the village grows quieter with each passing hour. Chickens settle inside coops, doors bar shut. Somewhere along the lane, someone chops late firewood beneath the moonlight. You mend a cracked tool handle while supper bubbles softly nearby. Your wife patches worn wool stockings near the firelight using thread unravelled from older cloth. Medieval households repair everything endlessly. Tools, clothing, pots, roofs, harness straps, hope. Especially hope. The brown dog receives a few precious scraps beside the hearth, and immediately decides he will defend this cottage with his life, despite possessing approximately the combat ability of damp bread. After supper you step briefly outside. Cold air strikes your face sharply. The sky has cleared entirely now. Stars burn above the valley in icy clusters, while frost gathers across rooftops and frozen fields. Smoke rises straight upward from chimneys into the still night air. Far away beyond the dark hills, you hear wolves, or perhaps only dogs. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, especially after sunset. You stand listening for a moment anyway. The village church glows faintly in the darkness, 1 candle still burning near the narrow window beside the altar. Some priest or widow likely keeps vigil there tonight, praying for milder weather, healthier crops, stronger children, or merciful saints. The requests blur together during winter. You return inside and bar the door against the cold. The rushlight burns low beside the hearth now, its little flame trembling gently whenever wind slips through the cottage walls. Your child already sleeps again beneath rough wool blankets. You lie down beside the fading warmth while the dog curls against your boots. Outside, frost slowly seals the valley in silver silence. Morning arrives pale and silent beneath a sky the colour of old wool. Frost clings thickly to the cottage shutters, turning every crack of light into thin silver lines across the room. The fire has nearly died during the night, leaving only faint red embers beneath soft grey ash. You wake curled tightly beneath blankets with the brown dog pressed against your feet like a badly trained but surprisingly effective heater. Outside, the village remains quiet. Too quiet. Heavy snow muffles everything. You rise carefully so as not to wake the child still sleeping near the hearth. Your joints ache immediately from cold and hard labour, which seems deeply unfair considering how much medieval peasants already endure without their knees staging personal rebellions. The rushlight beside the wall has burned itself into a little puddle of hardened grease overnight. Your wife kneels near the embers, coaxing flame back into existence using dried moss, twigs, and patience. Mostly patience. Soon thin smoke curls upward once more toward the soot-black rafters. Breakfast is small again. Always small now. A little oat porridge flavoured with onion and a pinch of salt precious enough to inspire poetry. You eat slowly beside the weak fire while snow drifts past the shutters outside. Today the village speaks of saints. Not because anyone suddenly grows more holy during famine. Quite the opposite, really. Hard winters make people cling fiercely to relics, charms, blessings, prayers, herbs, pilgrim badges, and every uncertain promise of protection available between heaven and muddy earth. Word spreads quickly after dawn that Father Aldrich plans a procession around the church fields to pray for mercy before winter worsens further. Some villagers scoff quietly. Most attend anyway. You wrap yourself in cloak and scarf before stepping outside into the cold brilliance of fresh snow. The village lane has vanished beneath white drifts broken only by footprints and wagon tracks frozen stiff overnight. The brown dog bounds happily ahead as though famine itself has been cancelled by weather. Near the churchyard, villagers gather beneath bare trees carrying candles sheltered inside little horn lanterns. Smoke rises from their breath into the sharp morning air. Frost sparkles across gravestones half buried beneath snow. Father Aldrich emerges from the church wearing heavy robes beneath a fur-lined mantle clearly older than he is. A young altar boy follows, carrying a brass censer swinging clouds of incense into the freezing air. The smell drifts strangely warm among the snow and silence. Beside the priest walks old Agnes, the village healer, carrying bundles of dried herbs tied with red cord. Officially, the church disapproves of certain folk practices. Unofficially, Father Aldrich appears willing to cooperate with anything short of summoning demons if it might improve the harvest. Practical man. The procession begins slowly around the church boundary. Bells ring softly overhead while villagers murmur prayers through scarves and chattering teeth. Candles flicker inside lanterns. Snow crunches beneath the boots. Father Aldrich sprinkles holy water along the frozen field edges, while reciting Latin phrases most villagers do not understand but deeply appreciate hearing anyway. Latin sounds wonderfully confident even when circumstances are not. Old Agnes follows behind, tossing rosemary, juniper, and dried lavender into small braziers carried by two boys. The smoke trails blue-grey against the white snow. Some swear rosemary keeps sickness from entering homes. Others claim juniper frightens wandering spirits. One man insists lavender simply makes misery smell nicer. All possibilities remain believable. You walk quietly among the others while the dog trots in delighted circles through the snowdrifts. Children follow close behind the procession, whispering excitedly about saints and miracles. A little girl asks whether St. Bridget can stop wolves from eating sheep. Another asks whether saints dislike snow. No one answers confidently. At the far edge of the churchyard stands a weathered stone cross darkened by age. Tiny offerings crowd its base candle stubs, ribbons, beads, dried flowers, bits of bread, and little wooden charms carved with protective symbols older than Christianity itself. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where old pagan customs ended and village Christianity began. Most medieval villages simply layered beliefs together like winter blankets. Father Aldrich pauses beside the cross and raises his hands. The villagers kneel in the snow. Cold seeps immediately through your boots and knees while wind drifts softly across the fields. The priest prays aloud for healthy spring planting, protection from illness, mercy for hungry households, and strength through the remaining winter months. His voice trembles slightly near the end. Perhaps from cold. Perhaps not. Afterward, villagers linger in little groups outside the church while snow continues falling lightly around them. Agnes distributes herb bundles to several mothers worried about fever spreading among children. Tiny cloth pouches filled with thyme, garlic, and dried mint change hands beside whispered instructions. Hang it near the bed. Boil this in broth. Burn this if coughing worsens. No one can quite agree whether the herbs heal sickness or merely comfort frightened people. Sometimes comfort matters equally. Inside the church, candles glow warmly beneath painted saints darkened by centuries of smoke. You step through the oak doors for a moment, seeking warmth and stillness. The air smells of wax, incense, damp stone, and old wood. Beautiful silence settles beneath the vaulted ceiling, broken only by occasional coughs, and the soft scrape of boots upon rushes scattered across the floor. Near the altar rests a silver reliquary supposedly containing a finger bone from St. Edric. Supposedly, a woman kneels before it, weeping quietly into folded hands. Nearby, an old farmer touches the reliquary gently before crossing himself 3 times in rapid succession, as though extra blessings might improve the odds. You light a tiny candle yourself. Its flame flickers weakly among dozens already burning. Small lights against long darkness. Outside again, midday approaches beneath thickening clouds. Snow drifts steadily across the fields beyond the churchyard. Villagers begin returning slowly toward their cottages carrying herbs, blessings, prayers, and the same hunger they arrived with. Still, something about the bells and candles softens the morning slightly. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the memory of hope. The brown dog shakes snow violently across your cloak as you start home. Naturally, snow remains on the ground for 3 days. By the 4th morning, the village has become a world of white fields, black tree branches, and smoke drifting low beneath iron-grey skies. Frost thickens along cottage roofs each night, while every footpath hardens into uneven ridges of frozen mud sharp enough to punish careless ankles. Winter settles properly now. Not the gentle sort sung about by travelling minstrels beside warm fires and roasted geese. Real winter, working winter, the kind that cracks hands open, freezes water buckets solid, and makes every simple task feel like dragging stones uphill. You wake before dawn once more to the sound of wind rubbing bare branches against the cottage wall. The fire has nearly gone cold again. Your wife sleeps curled beside the child beneath layered wool blankets, while the brown dog snores softly near the hearth, with astonishing confidence for a creature contributing nothing to the household economy. Outside, darkness still covers the valley. But work waits anyway. It always does. You pull on stiff boots and step into the freezing yard carrying a lantern whose little flame trembles wildly in the wind. Snow crunches beneath your feet. Your breath rises pale into the darkness. The first task is water. Always water. The village well has frozen partly over during the night. forcing several men to hack through ice using axes while muttering curses foggy enough to qualify as weather themselves. The rope burns your palms as you haul up the heavy bucket. The water sloshes dark and bitterly cold. Nearby, old Martin struggles with a broken fence post while snow gathers steadily upon his shoulders. You'll freeze before spring. You tell him. Probably, he answers calmly, but the goats will escape first. Reasonable priorities. Together you spend the early morning repairing hedgerows and fences buried beneath snowdrifts. Wind whistles across the open fields, carrying fine ice crystals that sting your face. Your fingers numb almost immediately despite wool wrappings beneath your gloves. The land itself feels exhausted. Fields lie pale and empty beneath frost. Thin stalks of failed grain still poke through the snow in places like old bones beneath skin. Crows gather in dark clusters, searching desperately for anything edible among the frozen furrows. Even the animals look leaner now. A farmer farther down the valley hacks frozen turnips from the ground with more violence than gardening usually requires. Another drags bundles of dead brushwood toward his cottage for fuel. Winter labour rarely looks heroic. Mostly it looks cold. By sunrise, smoke rises from dozens of chimneys across the village, while monastery bells drift faintly through the crisp air from miles away. The sound travels clearly across frozen fields. Time still belongs to bells even when the world freezes around them. You return briefly home for breakfast, coarse bread softened in hot broth beside the hearth. One onion remains hanging from the beam overhead. The sight of a single onion now inspires careful, strategic thinking, normally reserved for military campaigns. After eating, you head toward the woodland edge with several villagers carrying axes and rope. Fuel matters almost as much as food. Without wood or peat, hunger becomes the smaller problem very quickly. The forest stands silent beneath heavy snow. Pine branches droop under white weight while frost sparkles across moss-covered stones. Every sound echoes strangely far between the trees' axes striking wood, boots crunching snow, distant crows calling overhead. You work steadily beside the others, cutting deadfall branches and dragging logs toward waiting sledges. Breath steams, muscles ache. Snow slips constantly down collars and sleeves with malicious accuracy. At midday, the villagers rest briefly near a charcoal burner's abandoned shelter half buried beneath drifts. Someone passes around weak ale from a leather flask while another shares dried peas, roasted black over a tiny fire. Not delicious, but warm? Conversation drifts lazily among the group. Someone claims wolves attacked sheep north of the marsh. Someone else heard the Lord Steward plans new taxes come spring. A third insists monks at the abbey secretly store enough grain to feed half the valley. No one can quite agree whether rumours grow from truth or merely from cold people standing too long together. You warm stiff hands over the fire while snowflakes drift slowly through the trees. One villager produces a tiny carved charm from beneath his tunic and hangs it briefly near the flames. It resembles a crude sun wheel etched into bone. For luck, you ask. For good harvests. Does it work? He considers carefully. Not lately. Fair enough again. By afternoon, the sledges creak heavily back toward the village loaded with wood. The road has grown slick beneath packed snow and hidden ice. Twice you nearly fall. Once old Martin actually does fall directly backward into a drift and remains there staring at the sky for several long seconds. You dead? Someone asks. Not yet. Good. Still your turn to carry the rope. Even famine cannot entirely kill village humour. As dusk approaches, the valley fills once more with chimney smoke and fading light. Women gather frozen laundry from lines. Children carry peat indoors beneath oversized cloaks. Chickens complain loudly while being shut into coops for the night. You spend the final daylight hours patching roof thatch where wind loosened bundles above the cottage. Straw scratches your frozen fingers while snow melts slowly down your neck. The brown dog supervises from below with complete uselessness. At last darkness settles. The church bell rings evening prayer. Inside your cottage, warmth waits faintly beside the hearth once again. Pea broth simmers gently over the fire while damp mittens dry from a wooden peg near the rafters. You lower yourself heavily onto the bench. Every bone aches. Every muscle protests. Yet tomorrow will demand the same work all over again. That is the brutal rhythm of famine winters. Not constant tragedy. Constant endurance. Outside, snow continues falling softly across the frozen fields. Several days later, the snow begins to thaw. Not fully. Winter still grips the valley with stiff white fingers, but water now drips steadily from cottage roofs during midday, and muddy tracks reappear beneath the slush along the village lanes. The air smells different too, less sharp ice, more wet earth and smoke. The change unsettles people almost as much as the cold itself. Thaw means movement. Travellers return to the roads. Merchants appear again. Tax collectors become theoretically possible. And every villager starts wondering how much food remains until spring planting. You wake before dawn to the sound of wagons creaking somewhere beyond the lane. Through the shutters, torchlight flickers faintly across the mist. The manor keep prepares for a feast. Not a grand royal feast, perhaps. Nothing with swans stuffed inside peacocks or musicians hanging from chandeliers, but large enough to stir the entire valley awake with smells and rumours before sunrise. A winter gathering. Minor nobles from nearby estates. Several merchants. Perhaps even abbey guests. The lord means to maintain appearances despite famine, because noble dignity apparently requires roasted meat at all costs. Outside, servants hurry through the muddy yard carrying barrels, baskets, and armfuls of firewood toward the manor kitchens. Horses stamp clouds of steam into the cold morning air, while cooks shout instructions through open doorways glowing orange with firelight. You stand beside the lane watching briefly with several other villagers. Nobody says much. The smell says enough already. Wood smoke, roasting onions, fresh bread, and beneath it all, rich drifting scents of meat turning slowly over kitchen fires. Your stomach tightens instantly. Beside you, old Martin mutters something that may be prayer or may simply be envy wearing a religious hat. The brown dog sits alert beside your boots, staring toward the manor with complete devotion. Clearly he considers this feast a personal opportunity. You spend the morning hauling peat from the drying stacks beyond the fields while distant preparations continue at the keep. Bells ring, carts arrive, servants rush between buildings carrying linens and candles. The entire manor seems alive with movement. Even the banners hanging from the walls have been brushed clean of snow and mud. Red and gold cloth snaps sharply in the wind above the gatehouse towers. By midday, riders begin arriving along the frozen roads. Minor lords wrapped in fur-lined cloaks. Ladies riding beneath wool hoods trimmed with fox fur. Men-at-arms carrying lances bright with little pennants. Pack horses loaded with chests and gifts. The villagers notice everything, especially the horses. Fat horses attract attention during famine the way treasure attracts thieves. You pass near the manor fields while carrying bundles of firewood and catch glimpses through the open gatehouse. Servants spread fresh rushes across the hall floor mixed with sweet herbs to improve the smell. Beeswax candles stand ready along the tables. Kitchen boys race back and forth carrying trenchers stacked high. A musician tunes a harp somewhere inside. The sound drifts strangely delicate through the cold air. No one can quite agree whether feasts during famine are cruel, necessary, or simply inevitable. Lords must display wealth and hospitality. Alliances depend upon it. Reputation matters. Power must look powerful. Still, hungry villagers notice every roasted bird. Near the kitchens, steam billows upward from giant cauldrons while cooks shout over one another. You smell beef. Actual beef. Not watery broth politely introduced to beef at a distance. Real roasting meat thick with herbs and onions. The brown dog nearly walks directly into the moat from distraction. A kitchen servant catches you lingering near the outer wall and waves you closer unexpectedly. "Need wood stacked," he says, quickly. You obey immediately. For the next hour you work beside sweating servants hauling logs into the steaming kitchen corridors. Heat rolls outward from enormous hearths where spits turn steadily above roaring flames. The sight inside feels almost unreal after weeks of thin meals. Rows of bread, wheel cheeses, barrels of ale, bundles of leeks and carrots, pies cooling upon wooden boards. One cook bastes roasting geese while another curses loudly at spilled gravy. Kitchen boys dodge between tables carrying knives, herbs, and steaming pots with the desperate speed of battlefield messengers. Medieval kitchens during feast days resemble organized warfare fueled entirely by onions. A servant tosses you a scrap of crust while pointing toward another wood pile. You catch it instinctively. Warm bread, fresh bread. For one dangerous second, your body wants to hide it immediately inside your coat like stolen treasure. Instead, you eat slowly beside the doorway while steam fogs the cold air around you. The brown dog receives half despite contributing nothing except emotional support and excellent begging technique. As dusk approaches, music begins inside the great hall. Laughter follows soon after. Golden light spills from the narrow windows across the snowy yard while servants continue hurrying through the dark, carrying platters and pitchers. Outside the gates, villagers drift slowly homeward beneath the smell of supper they will never touch. The contrast hangs heavily over everything. Inside the hall warmth, candles, roasted meat, wine, songs. Outside frost, muddy lanes, thin broth, patched cloaks, and storehouses growing emptier each week. Yet strangely, resentment never fully blooms. Not openly. Perhaps hunger leaves little strength for rage. Perhaps medieval life simply trains people too thoroughly in unequal things. Or perhaps everyone understands winter eventually humbles rich and poor alike, only at different speeds. Night deepens over the valley. You carry your final bundle of wood back toward the cottage beneath stars glittering cold above the fields. Music from the manor drifts faintly across the dark like sound from another world entirely. At home, pea broth waits beside the hearth. Thin, hot, enough! You sit beside the fire listening distantly to the feast continuing beyond the hill, while your child sleeps beneath blankets and the dog dreams beside the embers. Outside, the manor hall glows warm against the winter darkness. But the valley itself remains hungry. The feast at the manor fades slowly into memory over the following days, though traces of it linger stubbornly across the valley like wood smoke after rain. Villagers speak of the dishes they smelled drifting from the kitchens, the candles burning in every window, the musicians, the fur-lined guests arriving on glossy horses. Mostly, though, they speak of leftovers. Not because anyone expects generosity exactly, but great feasts create movement afterward. Bones discarded, bread crusts traded, servants slipping scraps to relatives, kitchen boys suddenly very popular among lonely widows. Famine teaches people to notice where crumbs travel. The thaw deepens by week's end. Snow retreats into grey patches beneath hedges and trees while muddy water floods the roads once more. The frozen marsh near the eastern track has softened dangerously, swallowing cartwheels to their axles. Smoke hangs low over the valley beneath damp skies that never fully brighten. You spend the morning repairing a section of collapsed fence beside the lane when a group of travellers appears from the northern road. Pilgrims, at least 6 of them. They wear heavy cloaks crusted with mud and stitched with tiny badges from distant shrines, shell symbols, little pewter saints, crosses darkened by rain. Each traveller carries a walking staff polished smooth from long roads. The villagers watch them approach cautiously. Travellers bring news. News brings worry, and occasionally fleas. The lead pilgrim, a broad-shouldered woman with grey streaks in her hair, asks politely whether the village church offers shelter or fire for the night. Father Aldrich naturally agrees before anyone can object. Priests possess dangerous habits of compassion. By evening, the pilgrims gather beside a roadside fire near the churchyard while villagers drift gradually toward the warmth and company. Damp wood crackles loudly beneath the iron pot suspended over the flames. Someone adds onions, someone else contributes barley. A communal stew forms the way many medieval things form uncertainly, but with determination. You arrive carrying a bundle of firewood while the brown dog races ahead toward the fire with criminal optimism. The pilgrims welcome you easily enough. Long roads wear sharp edges off people eventually. Cloaks steam beside the flames while darkness settles over the valley. The church bell rings, compline softly overhead. Smoke rises upward into the cold night carrying scents of peat, broth, wet wool, and burning pine. One pilgrim passes round a flask of rough apple cider. Another unwraps dried figs from cloth. Actual figures. Several villagers stare with near-religious reverence. The broad-shouldered pilgrim laughs softly. Gift from monks near the southern coast, she explains. They claimed figs strengthen the spirit. Old Martin chews thoughtfully before nodding once. Spirit strengthened. Fair conclusion. The fire burns brighter as more villagers join the gathering. Children huddle beneath blankets, listening wide-eyed while travellers speak of distant roads and strange places. A young pilgrim describes crossing mountain passes buried beneath snow. Another claims he saw the sea last summer shining silver beneath moonlight. One old traveller swears an abbey farther north owns a bell so large 3 men sleep inside it during storms. No one entirely believes him, but no one entirely disbelieves him either. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where exaggeration ends once roads grow long enough. The stew finishes at last. Wooden bowls pass from hand to hand through the firelight while everyone eats slowly beside the flames. The broth tastes mostly of onion and smoke, though one miraculous scrap of salt pork appears in your portion briefly before disappearing forever. Still wonderful. The pilgrims carry little wealth themselves. Their boots are cracked, their cloaks patched repeatedly. One elderly man coughs constantly into a wool cloth darkened by old blood. Yet somehow they seem lighter than most villagers. Perhaps constant movement prevents despair from settling fully into the bones. Or perhaps people walking toward holy places simply learn different ways to carry hunger. The broad-shouldered pilgrim notices the brown dog curled beside the fire. He yaws. The dog lifts his head hopefully at the sound of possible attention. Apparently, she scratches behind his ears. Pilgrim dogs exist, you know. You raise an eyebrow. They follow shrine roads from town to town. Some swear they guide lost travellers. Old Martin snorts. This one guides himself directly towards soup. The dog immediately proves the point by attempting to steal bread from a child's bowl. A brief scandal follows. Later, once supper finishes and the fire settles into glowing embers, conversation quiets. People lean closer to the warmth while cold mist gathers beyond the churchyard walls. The pilgrims begin singing softly then, not loud tavern songs. Road songs. Slow ones. Simple harmonies rising gently into the night air beneath the bells and drifting smoke. You sit listening while stars appear faintly overhead between clouds. Around the fire, tired faces glow amber in the flickering light. Villagers, wanderers, children half asleep beneath cloaks. For a little while, hunger loosens its grip. Not gone, never gone, just quieter. The broad-shouldered pilgrim speaks again after the singing fades. "We passed villages worse than this farther north," she says softly. "Whole fields drowned last autumn, roads empty for miles." Nobody answers immediately. The fire cracks softly. At last Father Aldrich folds his hands inside his sleeves. Spring comes eventually. The old coughing pilgrim smiles faintly. "Yes," he says, though winter always behaves as though surprised by the news. A few tired laughs drift around the fire. You stare into the embers while wind moves gently through the bare trees overhead. Sparks rise upward and vanish into darkness. No one can quite agree whether travellers ease loneliness or deepen it by reminding villagers how wide the world remains beyond muddy fields and failing harvests. Perhaps both. The church bell rings once more before midnight. One by one, villagers begin returning home through the mist while the pilgrims settle beside the roadside fire beneath layered blankets and cloaks. You rise at last. The brown dog follows immediately. Together you walk back through the sleeping village beneath cold stars while smoke drifts softly above the rooftops and distant bells fade into the night. By morning, frost returns. It silvercoats the village roofs, stiffens the road outside your cottage, and turns every puddle into a dull mirror beneath the pale dawn sky. The pilgrims have already gone when you pass the churchyard, leaving only flattened grass beside the ashes of their fire and a few faint boot marks leading toward the southern road. The valley feels quieter after them. Travellers always carry a little noise away when they leave songs, rumours, strange saints, impossible bells large enough for sleeping men, and the warm memory of figs shared beside a roadside flame. You stand for a moment near the cold ashes while the brown dog sniffs hopefully among them. Nothing remains. He looks personally betrayed by history. The church bell rings once, soft and low. You turn homeward through the frost. Fields stretch pale around the village, lying still beneath winter's grip. The failed wheat, the flooded furrows, the broken cartwheel in the ditch, the red cloth tied against bad luck, the distant manor roof dark against the morning sky, all of it waits beneath the same quiet cold. No one can quite agree whether spring begins in the soil, the sky, or the heart of a hungry farmer who keeps lifting tools anyway. You only know the day must be lived. At home, the hearth has been coaxed awake. Thin smoke curls upward into soot-black rafters. Your wife stirs oat porridge while the child sits wrapped in blankets, still sleepy, watching the little flame as though it might tell a story. Breakfast is modest. Warm enough? Shared carefully. Then you step outside with your tools and walk toward the field. The earth resists beneath your boots, half frozen, half mud, stubborn as any lord. You mend a hedge first, then clear dead brush from the ditch, then test the soil with your spade where spring planting may one day begin. The dog follows, rolling once in frosted grass with disgraceful joy. By midday, clouds part slightly. A weak blade of sunlight touches the far ridge. It does not warm much, but everyone notices. Old Martin pauses beside his fence and lifts his face toward it. Still there, he says. The sun, I thought it had sold itself to the manor. You laugh softly, and the sound feels strange after so many quiet days. Even now, beneath famine, the village continues. Smoke rises, bells ring, bread is divided, tools are mended, Children chase one another between cottages until called inside. An old woman ties herbs above her door. Father Aldrich crosses the churchyard carrying a lantern, though daylight remains. Somewhere near the mill, someone begins singing badly and refuses to stop. Toward evening you return home through fields brightened by frost. The sky glows faintly rose behind bare trees. The manor stands silent now, its feast finished, its windows dim. The abbey bells sound far away, softened by distance. Inside the cottage, supper waits in a small pot peas, onion, broth, and enough warmth to gather hands around. You sit close to the fire. The dog settles at your boots. The rushlight trembles. Outside, night lowers slowly over the valley, but not harshly now, more like a wool cloak drawn around tired shoulders. And so the world grows still. The field sleeps beneath frost. The road sleeps beneath mud hardened by cold. The broken cartwheel sleeps in its ditch. The shrine stone, the market square, the abbey guest house, the smoky alehouse, the manor hall, the pilgrim fire all fade backward into darkness, becoming quiet shapes inside memory. You breathe slowly. The hunger has not vanished. The winter has not ended. But for tonight, the door is barred, the hearth is warm, the child is sleeping, and the bells are far enough away to sound almost like a dream. You let your hands rest open near the embers. The flames sink lower. The cottage softens. Smoke curls upward. Beyond the walls, frost gathers gently over the sleeping village. No one hurries now, no carts creak, no steward counts grain. No market bell calls the hungry into rain. Only the small fire remains, breathing softly in the dark. And you may rest here, just here, beside the dim glow, beside the old wool blankets, beside the dog twitching in sleep, chasing some kinder field where breadcrumbs fall often and no one asks questions. The medieval night closes around you quietly, not as a threat now, but as a shelter. The rafters darken, the last rushlight fades, your breathing slows with the settling ash, with the distant bells, with the soft hush of frost against thatch. And somewhere beyond the cold fields, beyond the abbey tower and the road through the trees, spring waits without speaking.